Hey folks, welcome back. This is Joel, and in this video we will continue with our discussion on network automation. We will mainly talk about a very interesting topic, which is NetDevOps, right? So just last week I was going through my preparation for the DevNet certification, and that's where I came across a very interesting lab to understand the concepts of NetDevOps, right? And I thought I'll just quickly spin it up on my laptop and make a quick video about it so that people can have a look at it if they don't have time to spin up the whole or make the whole setup on their laptop, right? So yeah, so NetDevOps, right? Let me show you a bunch of things now. So the first thing is, instead of creating your own lab, you can always go back to Cisco Devnet, right? And Cisco Devnet has a lot of pre-built labs for you, which means you have a lot of access to a lot of platforms. Almost every Cisco platform is covered here, so you have a bunch of them. You can anytime come down here, reserve it, and start working on them. Some of the labs or some of the platforms are sandboxes are actually always on as well, which means you don't even need reservation for those, right? So in our video today, we will be mainly looking into this particular sandbox, which is, give me a second. Yeah, so we'll be mainly looking into the multi-iOS Cisco test network. You can probably, book this one or reserve it for a day or two and, practice it as well, right? So that's there. The other thing is, while I was skimming through the internet, I came across a very interesting write-up by, I think, the GitHub user Julio Gomez, right? And it's a very nicely written, very detailed understanding of NetDevOps. Once I read through it, I thought I really want to give this a try, and that's where I decided to put up this video and try it out, right? So I would highly recommend going through the introduction section of this particular write-up, and we will mainly be concentrating on one of the demo in this particular lab today, right? So like I said, you are free to book the sandbox and try this out yourself as well, and that'll be a really good thing to do because you'll understand the whole crust of NetDevOps in a very nice way, right? Cool. That being said, let me just try to summarize what we are doing, and then let's get started with it, right? So if you're very new to NetDevOps, NetDevOps is basically, the fundamental idea of NetDevOps is using the software development principles to kind of manage and configure your network, right? All the principles which you have in your software development cycling, like for example, you have your version control, right? You do a bit of testing, and then you kind of deploy, right? So you have the whole CI/CD pipeline and all of that, right? So those are some of the key terms which almost every software developer is familiar with, right? So the whole idea of NetDevOps is kind of using that kind of a framework and architecture so that you can configure and maintain your network, right? So in our case today, or in our environment today, we are basically going to have a local environment, right? A local dev, and then you're going to have a remote environment, right? So just to highlight here, so this will be the local, so it's going to be literally my laptop, right? And whereas the remote one, right, which is this one, this is going to be the sandbox, the Cisco sandbox, right? So what is happening here, right? Let's go from laptop, or let's do the local thing and then go down to the sandbox. Now again, whatever you see on the screen, it's not frozen, right? Which means it's not that NetDevOps has to be done this specific way. You could probably use different kinds of tools to accomplish the same result, but what we are doing here in this particular lab is just one use case and one way of doing it, right? So I just wanted to clear that. Okay, now that being said, just let me try to introduce you to some of the tools as you see on the screen. One of them is Ansible, right? So Ansible is a very interesting tool when you want to kind of do some repeated tasks, right? You want to automate some of the repeated tasks. Now Ansible itself has a great set of modules to connect to the network devices and do some configuration. You can check out my previous video on this. I've made a video on how to use Ansible, set up Ansible and use Ansible and all of that. But in this particular use case, we are not actually going to use Ansible to configure the network directly. We will basically use Ansible more like an orchestrator here, right? And you have NSO, right? So the NSO is basically a Cisco's, I could basically call it as an automation engine, right? Because it tries to automate or configure any kind of devices, right? So this is the platform which we are going to use to directly interface with the devices, right? So this is the platform where which will literally talk with the devices, configure it, maintain the configurations and so on, right? I mean, again, like I said, this is not frozen. Probably in your architecture you might directly use Ansible to talk to the devices, right? Well and good. I mean, if that use case satisfies that kind of a situation satisfies your use case, I mean, that's nothing is wrong, right? It's just a way of doing it. But here we are basically using NSO because NSO does a lot of work for you, right? One thing is it has amazing legacy support. Even if your devices don't have something like netconf or restconf, you can still configure those devices, right? And it gives you like a single source of truth for all your configurations, right? It does a bit of fault management and a lot of things. So if there is NSO, I would say that's the most easiest way to do it, right? So, and what else? We also use some kind of a version controlling, right? And that's where the GitLab comes into picture. You would have heard of GitHub, right, before. The most important thing is you need to know the Git protocol, right? How does the Git protocol work and so on. So again, that's something which the software development team or the software developers are very well versed with, right? Because they use that to version control their source code, right? And we are trying to adopt that same framework now for my network. All right. Good. So that being said, so this is basically your version control system, right? I mean, I'm just explaining the individual pieces now. I'll show how all of this fits together. The Ansible and the NSO on your remote sandbox does the same job as what they were doing on the local. And you have your VIRL, right? VIRL is basically your emulation software, right? Almost all of us know VIRL. In my videos, you probably would have seen me using a lot of Eve, but VIRL is also pretty cool. And I think the latest release or the latest upgrade of VIRL is like CML Labs, right? CML Personal Edition. You also see something called PyTAS here. This is more like a testing framework, right? This is mainly used for defining your tests and automating them, right? It has a lot of other use cases as well. One of the main use cases is for testing, right? So that being said, give me a second. Yeah. All right. So that being said, now how does all of these different tools fit into the picture, or how do they complete the picture and help us achieve our NetDevOps strategy, right? That's the question. That's the main question. So that's pretty interesting, right? So let me take probably a different color just to show you the workflow, right? Maybe just to separate. So probably let's pick pink. Yep. So what happens? So the network engineer basically sits over here, or let's just think. Yeah, I think that'll be better. So the network engineer obviously has a laptop, right? So the network engineer basically sits over here. It's a very bad representation of a person, but yeah. So the network engineer sits down here, and he or she has access to what? The network configs, right? So I mean, the network engineers, just like your software developers, whenever a software developer is trying to write a new piece of code, first thing he or she has to do is get the existing piece of code, right? So in this case, it is basically get the existing set of configs for a network. And from where do you get that? You get it from the GitLab, right? Basically because GitLab is kind of like your version controlling system. It is having all the current configurations of your network, right, stored over here. So as an engineer, or as a network engineer, my first step would be to kind of get this down here. Use a different color. I think that's not visible. Okay, that's also not that good. So let me go back to my black. Give me a second. Yeah. So the first step would be to kind of like pull all the current configuration, from the network, right? So you have the network configs. Now, the engineer who is sitting here might not be happy with the current configurations. He or she wants to kind of like go and do some changes to the network, right? So they'll do it, right? Probably change some OSPF neighborship or change the BGP neighborship or whatever. I mean, in a day-to-day network, you have a lot of changes which happen, right? So you are free to do the changes, right? And you will observe when I show you the actual demo, you don't literally have like, running config or a, text config where you go and do the changes, right? It's a very structured YAML based, configurations which is stored here. So it's very easy for people to read, at the same time do some changes, right? You don't have to dig through like a show running configuration and go and do the changes, right? So for now, just imagine network configs are basically your YAML files which define your current state of the network, and at any point of time, if I want to do a change, I can go and do the change here. So once I do the change, what it does is, I mean, you can run the Ansible playbooks, right? And Ansible playbook, like I said, Ansible plays the role of orchestrator here. So Ansible will look at the changed configs, right? And it will try to talk to NSO. Now NSO, like I said, it is the actual platform which is talking to the devices. So NSO has the latest config, right? It has the latest, single source of, truth, latest config from the devices, right? Now in my case, in my dev environment, I obviously don't have actual devices. So NSO has this inbuilt functionality called as NetSim, right? Wherein you can kind of like simulate a set of devices, right? You can say it's a light version of your VIRL or light version of your whatever it is, right? You can simulate a bunch of devices, right? Just to kind of do a syntactic check of your configurations, right? What I mean by that is, imagine I'm a network engineer, right? And I want to change the IP address of an interface, and I want to change it to say 192.168 and I don't know 3.5. But instead of typing 5, right, I made a human error and I went and typed say S, right? Now this is bad, right? I really want to capture this, because if I don't do it, then all my tests are going to fail, and it's going to, I mean, this is again a very small or a very silly mistake, but imagine there's always a chance when the network engineer is going to put in some configurations, he or she is going to do some typos and so on, right? So that is where the NSO and the NetSim actually plays a very important role, right? So the Ansible will instruct the NSO to look at the changed configs, right, and try to deploy those changed configs on those NetSim devices which you have, the simulated devices, and it will check if these configurations were successfully pushed. Now if they were successfully pushed, then it's good, all good, because you are now ready to go and test it on your actual environment, right? So if they did not pass, then it will give an error, so that the engineer can go and fix it, right? So all of this sanity check is done at the local site or the local platform. In my case, probably is going to be just a laptop, right? So you do it locally on your system as and when you are doing the changes to the network. Now once you are very happy with whatever you have done, let's say you have really figured out what you want to do, and you have found that the configuration what you typed in is everything is perfect, that's where you kind of take that config, the latest config which you have, and you push it up where? To the GitLab, right? It's very weird to say push it to GitLab, so I'm going to say push it, you're going to git push it, right? So you're going to git push it to the repository. So you're going to have the repository here for all the configs, right? So you're going to push this config, and when you push it, what happens is that, so GitLab, has these CI/CD pipelines, right? So pipelines are, you can think of CI/CD pipelines to be just some kind of task, a set of tasks, right? Just like your playbooks in your Ansible, right? So it's going to kick off certain pipelines. Now here specifically in this GitLab, we are going to kick off two pipelines, right? The first pipeline will be called as the test pipeline, and the second pipeline will be called as the production pipeline. Now each of these pipelines are going to have three things, right? 1, 2, 3. You're on production, you're going to have 1, 2, 3. What are these three things? 3 separate tasks, right? Might be getting a little lengthy, but bear with me, you'll get a more clear understanding once we finish it, right? So you're going to have 3 separate tasks per pipeline. So this is your pipeline here, right? So you have your pipelines, and you're going to have your two pipelines. One is your test pipeline, other one is your production pipeline, right? And they'll work sequentially like this. First test goes through and then the production. Now in the test pipeline, what are the three things you're going to have? So in the test pipeline, the first thing which is done, right, is that you will validate again. You will again validate the configurations which were changed here, right? So you obviously validate it locally, using NSO and the netsim, but you would also want to validate it, with actual devices, because here what you did was you validated using some netsim devices which are not even part of a topology. There is no topology also. You just have 3 or 4 devices, which are kind of like created within the NSO framework, right? They are like just simulated devices, not even part of a topology. So here, that's why on your test pipeline, what you do is you first go and validate it against what? You go and validate it against the actual devices. Now in a real production and in a real network, you probably might have actual lab environments, right? You might have an actual lab setup to test it, and then you will have a production network also, which will be hardware, complete hardware. Now in our demo, obviously both of these are simulated on VIRL, but need not be. I mean, you can have both of these on hardware, one of them on hardware, one of them on VIRL, anything, depending on your network. But in this case, we are going to have both our test and the production on VIRL, right? So you validate it, right? When I say validate, you again do a syntax checking, right? If the configuration is correct or not. So that's your validation stage, right? So where we are, so we are validating. So we are validating using this test VIRL network, right? Again, how the NSO and Ansible is playing part, it's the same job what it was doing here, right? So Ansible is just doing the orchestration part, and NSO is doing the actual, is the one which is actually doing the job for you, right? Ansible is more like a controller. It is basically telling NSO what to do in a sequential way, whereas NSO is the one which is actually talking to the devices, in this case the VIRL network, and doing the configurations. Now say we have done the validation, which is the syntax checking is done, right? So the next is you can deploy the configurations onto the test network. So let me just mention it as deploy, right? So you're going to deploy these configurations on your test network. Why you do that? Because sometimes when you do some changes in the network, it can have some adverse effects, right? So you want to capture all of that before you actually go and configure your production network, right? So you deploy those configs onto your test network, and once you do that, the next thing which gets triggered is the verification of the deployment, which is the PyTAS part, right? Let me mention it as PyTAS here. So the third one which gets triggered is the verification of the deployment which you just did. Now this is where it gets interesting. What does PyTAS do, right? PyTAS is pretty cool. It is more like a testing framework, which means I can simply create test cases, right? What is a test case? Something like this. I can create a test case saying, at any point of time, I want my network to always have OSP of say 5 OSP of neighbors, right? So I can define this, and I would basically expect my network to always have that irrespective of whatever changes I do, right? So you can define such kind of test cases one after the other, and this PyTAS will go about connecting to the devices and doing those test cases. Why? Because you have already validated the syntax now, you have already deployed those changes to your test network. The final stage is basically PyTAS, verifying that yes, those changes what you have done are not causing any issues with the rest of the network, right? So now once everything is good, once this pipeline is completed, once these 3 tasks are successfully run, that's where the second pipeline gets triggered, right? And that's where the production pipeline comes into play. Again, in the production, we do the same task. We do validation, right? We basically look at the configurations of my production network, right, which are stored in the NSO, and we validate against those configurations, right? We check against those devices, if our configurations which we are going to do are valid. Then we again do the same thing. We go and do the deployment, right, into the production network. And once we deploy, we do the third task, which is nothing but your PyTAS testing, where we test, yes, these configurations are very much valid, right? and once that is done, your whole cycle changes, or whole cycle completes, right? So look at, and obviously it's gonna probably take days for someone to sit and do all of this manually, but because of automation, now all of this gets, you know, streamlined, and all of this gets triggered automatically, and you don't have to do anything. You just need to sit here and change the config, and you can just sit and watch the movie play on, right? It's all of these pipelines. So on the right hand side, this one finishes, and once you know, you commit the changes, once you feel the configurations are correct, you commit the changes, then this pipeline gets triggered, and both the pipelines, one after the other, the test and the production pipeline, one after the other, they complete, and you know, within a matter of maybe couple of minutes, you'll probably have the configurations pushed onto the production network without any risk, right? So that's the whole thing which we are going towards right today, or in this particular video. There is another small example, or basically a very nice diagram to explain the same thing, right? You have the engineer sitting here. He or she will basically test it locally, test the configurations locally, then push it to GitLab, and the GitLab will trigger the pipelines using Ansible NSO. They'll use the testing VIRL topologies to test, verify using PyTAS, and come back and tell the engineer that, you know what, all the tests were successful. Then you can manually, you know, trigger the production pipeline, or you can make it automatic as well. So you can see the production pipeline getting triggered in the background, and the configurations going on to the devices, right? So that is literally what we are trying to do today. And so that being said, let's go back and see how do we achieve this. So like I said, I'll paste the link of the GitHub, you know, where the you know, author really explains step by step on how to book the lab, how to do it step by step. In my case, I've done some of the steps already, so I'll breeze through the ones which I've already done, and we will obviously, my main objective is to show you how all of this plays, you know, in action, right? So cool. Now the first step is obviously when you book the DevNet lab, you will be given like a VPN connection, right? So you'll get a VPN connection, and the details, basically the details to connect to a VPN like this, right? And you just need to you get that in an email, so you use that to connect to the sandbox. Once done, you can now basically connect up to SSH into the DevNet box, like a jump box, right? The password will be given to you, so don't worry about that. Let's paste it. There you go. So on the left hand side, I have my dev box. On the right hand side is my local local laptop, right? This is literally my laptop. On the left hand side, you have my dev box, which is the Cisco Sandbox. Cool. So the next is obviously you have to these nice people who have written the blogs, right? They have created a very good GitHub repository where everything you need is there in the repository. In my case, I have already, you know, cloned the GitHub repository into this folder called SPX, right? This particular folder. So everything I need is inside this, right? But you will have to obviously pull it inside that, and once you get the whole repository on your dev sandbox, you'll have to start installing, right? You'll have to I think run the you'll have to probably start running some of the scripts, like for example to set up the version controlling system, we'll have to go inside GitLab, right? You go inside GitLab and you'll have a setup script, right? So you'll have to do /setup.sh, and it will install all the dependencies needed, and it will completely go and install the GitLab for you, right? So how it is doing, again in the background, it is using Docker, right? Every single component of whatever we are discussing here has been containerized, right? So it's very easy. So if you want a GitLab instance here, you just spin up a Docker. You want an Ansible instance, you spin up a Docker, right? So that's how these guys are doing it. So here, if I see at any point of time Docker PS, I should see, you see here I have a GitLab Docker instance, you know, running, which is providing me the GitLab functionality. All right. So once you're done with the whole version controlling, you can come out. Let me just clear the screen a bit. So you can come out and you can probably go inside the CI/CD folder to set up the whole CI/CD tools, right? The CI/CD tools are basically all of these, right? The Ansible, the NSO, the PyTAS, the VIRL, and all of that. So again, you don't have to sit and manually set them up. I mean, obviously, if you really want to do that in your environment, you'll have to probably do it. But in this particular lab, you don't have to manually do it. They have, again, in this particular folder, you will find a very interesting setup script, right? You can, I mean, I would say when you're trying this lab on your own, if you want, you can always do a cat to understand what the script is doing, right? So it is basically doing all the steps which you would have manually done. It is doing it for you automatically inside a script, right? So so in my case, it was pretty easy. I had to just go and run that script, and it went and installed the NSO. It installed the VIRL. It installed you know, some of the dependencies which I showed you in the diagram, right? So once it is done, right? So let's go and check this out. So we were talking about this test setup and the production, you know, VIRL setup, right? So some of you probably might not know, but there are very interesting API libraries, right, to connect to your VIRL from, say, from a programming interface like Python, right? So we can check that. So what we'll do is, where are we right now? We are here. So let's jump into the VIRL folder. There will be always a VIRL folder, right? So you jump into that. See, you have two folders. One is test and one is production. So let's go inside the test folder, right? Let's see what do we have. Let me do a lsal. So you see, my bad. You see, you'll have a topology.virl, which will be literally the topology, and then you'll have a .virl folder, right? Which means we can now even see, just by doing VIRL nodes, right, we'll be able to see the topology itself, right? See, look here, we have all the information. Let me just try to pull this a little bit to the right. Yeah, here you go. Okay, that's better. So you can see I have, these are literally my these are the VIRL nodes corresponding to my test network. Similarly, I can go a step back and go to the production network and do the same thing, which is VIRL nodes. And now I should have the production network. So these are the two networks which we have, which for our testing purposes, right? So so these VIRL topologies are actually running on the, you know, Cisco Sandbox, right? And we are just using VIRL utils. It's a very interesting you know, Python module which helps you to connect to your VIRL. You can, using that module, you can spin up a VIRL instance as well. Maybe, you know what, let me just take you through it and show you a demo how to do that, because that's something which I found very, very interesting, right? So let me go to my local instance on the right hand side. Let me see where I am right now. Okay, so let's go inside CI/CD and let's go inside VIRL. So this is my local system on the right hand side, right? So let me go inside the VIRL test folder, right? So right now you see I just have the .virl rc you know, file. Let me do a cat of this, sorry, to show you what it has. It just has the username, password, and the VIRL host, right? So this is literally given to you when you you know, book the VIRL when you book the sandbox, right? So this information is given to you. Now, so you need to obviously have a .virl rc file in the folder where you would want to spin up your VIRL stuff, right? So you know what, let me, like I said, I want to show you the magic of this particular specific stuff, right, the VIRL stuff. So let me take a minute to show you that. Alright, so what I'll do is, by using a command, VIRL search, right? Okay, give it a second. Yeah, oh, my bad. So I think I did not spin up my Python virtual environment yet, right? So I normally like to use virtual environments when you talk about Python. So let me go and spin that up. I believe it should be somewhere. Let's do a source. I think it's inside my documents, if I'm not wrong. I think it's in my documents, my Python, and this thing bin and activate. Right, there you go. So now I've triggered my Python environment. So whenever you see a virtual environment, you'll see something like this, right? So this is my virtual environment. And now if I run the same command as earlier, right, viral search, now it will trigger your, let me just try to pull this inside. Yeah, so you see what is trying to show me is these are like some of the sample topologies which Cisco has built, and which is, you can probably get this on GitHub as well, right? So these are some, see, you see here you have a sample topology of 2 iOS routers, 9 routers. You have a topology built for Genie learning, which is mainly your PyTAS learning stuff. You have spine and leaf maybe for your Nexus stuff. So you have some of this, and you have a SD-WAN topology as well. So some of these topologies have already been built by Cisco and put it up on GitHub. So you can search and you can just use some of this. Like for example, I've searched I searched using this command, let's say, and I'm very interested in kind of spinning up one of this particular topology. Let's take the first one, right? So what you got to do is you got to run the command viral pull, right? And you'll have to just copy this and paste it here, right? So now it's going to pull the topology file onto your local system, and once it is there, the only thing you got to do is viral up, right? So now it's going to take the topology and depending upon whatever the viral server you have provided earlier, right, information of the viral server, it will now go and try to spin up the topology for you, right? And at any point of time you can just go and check what is the current status or what are the simulations running, right? So if I do viral ls, it will tell me that this particular simulation was just now started, and that is the name of the simulation, right? Next, I can also do viral nodes, where I will basically get information about the nodes. You can see one of the node is already active and the other one is coming up, right? Now if I keep on refreshing this, probably in a couple of minutes I should have, look at here, we have both of them active, and another few more minutes if we wait, we will basically have both of them becoming both of them being reachable, right? So it's as simple as that. And imagine if I want to kill this particular viral topology simulation, because I really don't want to waste Cisco's resources, so because I'm not going to use this topology, so I'm going to do just viral down, right? And there you go, it's successful. I don't have this simulation anymore. So it's that simple to interact with your viral topologies using your Python code, right? Cool. So let's get back on track. Let me just pull this up, give me a second. Yeah, so we have verified our viral topologies on the left hand side, right? Both my test and production network are here. Once we have that, the next is to set up your local environment, right? So whatever we did on the left hand side was the Cisco's dev box, right? But on the local environment also you can set up a bunch of things, like for example this section, right? This section on the right hand side, this is your local dev. So you need to have your Ansible, you need to have NSO over here to do some of your local testing, right? So that is why that's where you need to set up your NSO. So again, I'm not going to show you how to set up NSO, because again that's clearly defined in the doc how to do it, but the setting up NSO is one of the prerequisites. So you have to use the guide, the GitHub guide which I talked about, to set up NSO. Better stick to the version which they have mentioned, because you don't want to screw up if the lab, because of the nets and all of that. You don't want to use a different version and probably it might not work because of backward compatibility issues, right? So just stick to the version. I think in the document or in the guide they are talking about 4.5.3, so stick to that. And so once you are done with NSO, then you need to install Python and Ansible, right? So I already have my Python environment, that's why you see the virtual environment over here, and I also have Ansible inside it, right? I'm running this in Python, I don't know which version, let me just show it to you guys. So I'm running this in Python 3.6.10, right? And Ansible is probably 2.6.3 or something like that, right? So yeah, let me get out of this a minute. Yeah, that's cool. Next, once we are done with that, right? So once we are done with that, let me just clear the screen. So you have set up everything you need. You have NSO and Python on your local NSO, Python, Ansible on your local setup, and on the dev box, you have you have again set up everything which you need till now, which we discussed, right? Viral and all of that is done, which means from an environment point of view, like setting up all these various modules is done, right? So all of these individual modules are on the left hand side. All of the individual modules, they are running as Docker instances, right? So you have a Docker instance for NSO, another for Ansible, one for GitLab, and so on. That's on the sandbox side. And on my local side, we don't really have Docker. It is running individually. Ansible is nothing but Python, and NSO is running individually as well. You can obviously make that also containerized, but in this particular example, they are not doing that. Okay, cool. So next is on the local environment, it's always better to pull the full repository, which we did. So I think I'm out here. Let me go outside to. Yep. So where am I? Okay. So this is the repo, right? So this is the repo which you basically have to clone the repo, right, from the GitHub, which has been provided to you, right? We had to do it here as well. You see, it's the same repo. Whatever we saw here, it's the same repo here as well. Having the same repo on your local and the remote, machines, right? So pull this repo on your local system as well. And why are we doing this, or what are we doing now is we are digging deep a little bit on my local system, because as an engineer I will be sitting on my laptop, right? I will be doing stuff on my laptop. I would not go down to the dev box until I know exactly what configurations I have to push, because the dev box is kind of like the last place to do your testing and pushing of configuration, right? All your testing, when you're building a configuration, when you're trying out new configurations, you do it on your local system, right? So we need to concentrate a little bit on the local system. What do we do on the local system next? So you have the repo, and these people have built a very interesting, they have built a make file, right? So we'll see the contents of this make file. There's a file here called make file, right? You can see here. Let me just pull that up from my Visual Studio. I think it's better to view here. So let's see the make file, right? There you go. So this is the make file which you see, and the make file, basically you can think of it as a file with a bunch of instructions, right? So that you can execute them one after the other using certain commands. Like this make file, if I execute, I've already done this before, so I'm not going to run this again, but this make file, is going to do some tasks for you. Like for example, first thing is, it is going to start up your NSO, right? So you can see these are the various functionalities which have been defined. So you want to clean your whole environment, you can just run the command make clean, and it is going to clean up your whole NSO and netsim. You want to spin up your netsim with the devices, you run this, right? This key command, right? You want to clean up your netsim, you run this. You want to set up your NSO, you do this. You want to sync from, right, all the devices onto your NSO instance, you run this command, right? So in fact, you know what, let me just show you one of this, right? So let's run this sync from, actually. Let's see what the output is going to be. So let's pick this. Let's go back here. So instead of doing cat, let's do make, and give me a second, right? So let's paste, yeah. So we're going to do sync from. So now it's going to basically sync from, which means from the devices, right? From the netsim devices, the simulated devices, right? The configurations are going to be synced back to NSO. So you can see all the results are true, right? It got synced, successfully. Similarly, you can use the other options as well when needed, right? So I'll show you when you would need that, right? So so I think that's pretty cool. Now the other thing is, I could probably even show you how the whole NSO looks like for a minute, right? So I think that would give a very interesting idea as well. So the NSO which you have on your local system is kind of like a controller, right? So the controller itself has an interface very similar to like a Cisco device. So you can anytime connect to it using this command. It also has like a CLI, to which you can connect to. So look here, this is very similar to what we have, and you can run commands. Like for example, I can do show devices brief, and it will show me all the devices which are present inside this NSO, right? It's a very similar to like a Cisco GUI, right? You can connect to it and you can do a bunch of stuff on it, right? These are the devices. These are the netsim devices, right? I kept on saying here, these are the simulated devices over here, right? Which you see here under NSO, right? So, and you can also probably go and check out the running config of one of the guys. So you can do show running config devices and select, you know, one of the device, and probably let's select core 1, right? And if I do that, look here, I have the show running configuration of that particular device, right? This is basically in line with what I was telling earlier, that NSO stores the running config, you know, in a database of its own, right? So you can easily access it from the NCS or the NSO CLI. I mean, don't get confused between NCS and NSO, they are both the same. Initially, I mean, the company was acquired by Cisco, right? So that time they used to use, I think it was called network convergence systems, and they retained it still, and it's not changed to NSO, it's still NCS. But both are the same, it's not that NSO and NCS are different, right? So I showed you how to sync from the devices. You can also deploy, right? There is another function here. Let me show it here. The other function which you see here is the deploy function. So this deploy is going to pick the current configurations, you know, which you intend to be tested, and when you hit this deploy, it's going to go and deploy it on your, you know, Ansible, on your NSO's NetSim devices, and it is the Ansible Playbook is going to deploy it for you, right? So if you look at the playbook, it's pretty straightforward. So the playbook is here, right? You can see this is the playbook. So it has a bunch of plays. One is it is going to synchronize the configurations from NSO to devices. Then it is going to push new configurations into NSO, right? The new things which you want to test, and then the third play is basically pushing out new configuration from NSO to two-devices. So it's going to do this. And what is the inputs for the playbook? Obviously the two things, right? The inventory folder and the host.variables. Remember, we did this in the previous Ansible video. So depending on what you're gonna run, so these are the three environments, right? Dev is basically my local environment, production or test. So these are my three environments with which I want to run, and with which I want to test, right? Depending on what you choose, it is going to test against that environment. And the host variables is where you actually define your configurations. Like for example, let's pick one of these guys, maybe core 1 or something like that, right? So if I see here, this is the configurations in YAML file, right? So we are storing the configuration, or the configuration which you intend to put on the devices is kind of like stored in this way, right? It's defined in a very structured YAML way. Now this is really helpful because I really don't have to be a programmer to define this, right, or to understand this. It's very straightforward. It's very, you know, nested kind of way, wherein I can understand really, okay, this is the OSPF, this is the ID, process ID, this is the network, this is the router ID, and so on. So I can go and, you know, do this without any programming knowledge, right? So that is your host variables, or basically the network config section here, right? So now that we have a little bit of understanding about what are these various things and how is my local environment setup, we are, I think, good to actually do the demo, right? So to do the demo, it's pretty simple. What we are going to do is, I've not even showed you the stuff on the production side, but I'll show it to you as we do the demo, right? Otherwise it's going to be a very boring video with only lecture. So I'm going to start by running some stuff now so that you guys don't doze off. Okay, cool. So what is our use case? Let's say for example, let's go back to this YAML file, right? Let's go back to the YAML file. Actually, before going to the YAML file, let's follow the same procedure, right, which I explained. What is my first step? To get the current configuration, right? What is the current actual configuration which is there on the devices, right? And that's, you basically get that on your GitLab, because that's where you have the latest configuration. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go down to my, let's exit out of this, not needed. So where are we? So let's do a pwd. Yeah, we are here. So we are inside the Git. So I'm going to do a simple Git pull. Let's see what happens. There you go. So I did a Git pull and it is telling me that I'm already up to date, which means I have the latest config. So as an engineer, this is going to be my first step. I'm going to do a Git pull and get the latest configurations, or latest state of the network. Okay, so once I have that, what I'm going to do next? Next is I'm going to pick up one of the device. Let's say I want to tamper with it, right? I'm going to pick up one of the device. So say I'm going to pick up this device, which is core 1.yaml, and let's say I want to change the OSPF's router ID from 101 to say something like 102, right? Or say let's change it to 111, right? Maybe something, I'm not sure if someone else is having 102, so let's change it to 111, right? You see, this is pretty cool, right? Of VS Code, it is highlighting that I'm literally changing the files inside a Git project, right? So that's pretty cool. Anyway, so I've changed this. Let me just save this. So I intend to change this in my network, right? So I went and changed in my host variables. Next, what do we do next? So because you changed, you have to now comply with a little bit of Git stuff, right? So you have changed. Let's see, or let me clear the screen a bit. It's not visible. Let's come here. So if I do something like git status, what do you think we are going to get? See, it's telling me that I have changed something, right? I have changed I've modified, or I have changed the YAML file. Okay, it's also telling me that I have changed something else which I did not intend to do. So let me just actually go and delete that stuff. I really don't want that. I was just showing it earlier, right? I was showing you guys. So let me just delete that. So this particular folder, I don't need that, so let's delete that. Okay, cool. So that's it. So let's go back and let's run this again. Yeah, there you go. So this is what I wanted. It's telling me that there is some modification done on core1.yaml, which is fine. So it is still not even staged. It is just showing me that, because Git, once you enable Git, right, or on that particular folder, it will track. So it is as of now just tracking. So if I'm good with the changes, am I good with the changes? Maybe not. So how will I check? That's where that earlier stuff comes into play. So what I'm going to do now is, I'm going to do, let's go to, where am I? So I'm here, yeah. So I'm going to do a make, because I have to test it locally, right? I've just done the changes to the configuration, but I'm not sure if that is a valid configuration, right? So I have to go and do a make. A sync from is already done, so let me go and just directly deploy it, right? So there you go. I'm gonna paste this. Okay, I think I'm gonna remove that colon at the last. Yeah, there you go. So now it's going to go and deploy it on my NetSim devices, the local NetSim devices, right, which I have, the local devices on my laptop inside my NSO, right? Because I really need to test, right? Because if what I've done is not a valid configuration, I really don't want to mess up the stuff in the network. So I'm first doing a check, right? So let's wait for this to complete. So you can see the playbooks running one after the other. There you go. So we have done the changes, right? So you can see probably there were other changes as well. Maybe I was playing around, so that's why it's showing changed for everything. But I actually intended, or I actually did the change only for core 1 as of now, right? And you can see it ran properly, which means, nothing failed, which means my configuration was perfect. So I tested it locally. So now I'm in a good place to do what? To do git, not status, but do git add. So git add will go and add, I'll have to go to that specific folder. Give me a second. So I'll have to go inside host variables. Yeah. So git add what? This core 1.yaml, right? So I've added it. Adding is basically adding it to some kind of it adds to a staging area, right? The next step is very important. So I'll have to git commit this, right? So I'm going to git commit this, and I'll just copy this command from here. Just lazy to type the whole thing. So I'm going to git commit this, and I'm going to say that I'm changing the router ID from where? From 101. We change from dot 101 to what? To dot 111. Alright, let me close this. So there you go. Now I have even committed the changes to my repository, right? So I have committed this still to the local repository. So let me clear the screen a bit. So I'm still on my local system. I have not done anything on the remote side. right? Before doing the next command, I want to log in here and show you guys that, this is, let's keep this one here. Let's probably go to the activities, or yeah, because the things will start changing here on my GitLab, right? So I want to show you that this is happening because of what I am doing, right? So let me let me just go down to the CI/CD and keep it up. Probably here, this will be better. Yeah. So you see, this is the current state, right? You have test production. That's as of now. But see what happens as soon as I run the next command. So what I'm going to do next is, I did a git commit. Now I'm going to do a git push. So it is going to push the changes which I just now did onto the remote repository where the whole CI/CD pipelines are defined. There you go. So I'm going to do a git push. Okay, awesome. So push went in successfully. Okay, look here what has happened. A new test pipeline got created automatically. So that's very interesting, right? The CI/CD pipeline triggered. And that's exactly what I was telling earlier here, right? The two pipelines, test and the production pipeline. So one of the pipeline has already started, right? And we can go and see the status. One of them even passed. The validation has successfully completed, right? So, all right. So the second part is what? So one thing has already passed. We can go and check what's happening with the second one. So the second activity has started, and we can actually live see what is happening as well, right? The second task, like I said, is deployment, right? The first one was validation, doing the syntax validation. The second one was deploying the configurations, right? The changed configurations, pushing the configurations from NSO to the devices, to the test devices, right? Because this is the test pipeline. So you can see all of that is happening inside a playbook, inside the Ansible. You can see the live happening here. See, it succeeded. I can now go back and you will see a checkbox against the second one as well. Now the third one has started. And the third one, like I was telling, it is for verification. Once I push the configurations, I would need to verify that it is not breaking something. So that's where your PyTAS workbooks comes into, PyTAS test cases come into play. Again, the source code for all of this, you can, once you open the repo, you will get to see everything is written in Python, pretty straightforward. But I wanted to show you the whole pipeline, how it works, right? So look at the bunch of test cases which they have written. They have written the test cases saying that, we need to verify the OSP of neighbors, right? So even if you're changing probably the OSP of router ID, it is checking for all these test cases which have been predefined, and it is certifying that yes, all of that is passing and there is no error, right? So once this is done, right, once this particular test passes, then we'll have to wait for this to complete. After this, the second pipeline will get triggered. What is the second pipeline? The production pipeline. So let's wait for this to finish. All right, you can see this has passed now. If you go back to our pipelines, and you will see that the whole test pipeline has passed successfully, right? Which is pretty cool. Now what I'll do is, let me go to the merge request. So it will not automatically trigger the production pipeline, right? We will have to create a merge request. So let me create a new merge request, right? And what I'm going to say is, merge your test, right? Whatever is there in test pipeline or the test repo, we are basically going to merge it into which branch? The production branch, right? So there are two branches, right? One is your test and one is the production. Production will have the latest code which is tested, is then pushed to the production. So I'm basically saying, from this source branch, merge it to this target. I'm going to say compare and branches and merge, right? See, the title has automatically populated. I'm going to assign this to myself, that's a developer, right? Basically kind of like an authorization, right? That so that we have a record that who did this particular thing. And that should be it. So I'm going to hit the submit merge request, right? So it's asking me for authorization now. So let me click on the merge button here. So there you go. And the last part is, you can write in some comment if you want, or basically the most important part is, you'll have to go and close the merge. You open the merge request, you'll have to close it, right? So that being said, let's go and check the pipeline. What is happening on the pipeline front, right? There you go. The production pipeline has started, and in fact the validation has already succeeded, right? The validation, the syntax validation. So the same task are carried out again, right, which is basically, whatever we did it for the test environment, we are doing it for the production as well, right? The same, you can see here the three crosses. One, you have the validation, deployment, and the PyTAS. So the three things again are gonna be triggered. The only thing here is what you see here is this is something interesting, right? So when you created the pipeline, when they created this pipeline, they have explicitly given a knob here, right? They are asking for the user's permission to push or deploy it to production network. That wasn't the case for test, because test is just a lab or a test environment, right? You don't care even if it breaks. But here it is again asking for a double confirmation. Is it that as if asking me if should I approve it, right? So let me go and do that. So this is, I'm triggering it. So I'm approving it now. Now if you see, the pipeline or the job would have started, right? So you look at the job, it has started. So it is deploying now. We can also go and see live when that is happening. You can see here the Ansible Playbook is deploying it to the production. It is using the production YAML as the inventory file and deploying it, deploying the latest changes which we have made, onto the devices. Right? Let's give it a minute. It's happening. You can see here. Alright, so that got completed, which means the final pipeline or the final job would have started now. Here, the validation has started. So now it is checking, using the PyTAS, test cases which have been defined, right? It is trying to check if everything is good, right? It is trying to verify if the configuration and everything is passing. So you can see everything seems to be passing as of now. The amazing feature is, because we are using NSO, we can at any point roll back the config as well. If one of these test cases do not pass, we can write a small piece of code to roll back the configurations on my NSO, and that way all my devices will get rolled back to the previous configuration. But right now, since we do not do anything fishy, looks like everything is passing on, and the configurations will be saved on the device, new configurations. There you go, all the jobs are completed. We can also go and check in the pipeline. You see the latest pipelines have all completed successfully. The production, the changes were all done. While that was happening, I was quickly checking if the changes were actually done. You can see on the left hand side, I have connected to the VIRL device on which we did the changes, and I did a show run section OSPF. You can see the changes, right? You can see the 1.111 which we actually did, right? So the changes have actually gone into the production network, right? So you see how simple it was, right? The only thing which I had to do was go and change my the only thing which I had to do was go and change my YAML file here, right? The IP address, and then all of the other set of processes were triggered automatically, right? The checks were done, the validation was done, the deployment onto the test network was done. So all of that happened, kind of like in a systematic way, automatically, as you would do in a software development phase, right? So this is literally what we did, or this is what NetDevOps literally is, right? So there will be hundreds of engineers who will be doing changes on the network, right? So all this op1, op2, op3 are nothing but various operations on the network. So people are going to sit and do these changes locally on their system. They're going to test that it is the syntax is correct and so on. But after that is done, they're going to push this, right, using Git. They're going to push it to the repository, right, the code repository, the version control. And the version control, whenever it sees some changes, it will what? Trigger the pipeline, the two pipelines in this case, testing pipeline and the production pipeline. I mean, it's not going to trigger both of them. Obviously, it's going to trigger the test pipeline. The test pipeline is going to use something like Ansible and NSO to do the syntax checking, the validation, deployment, using into some kind of a test environment like this, right? It could be a emulation network like this, or it could be an actual network as well. Doesn't matter. Once deployment is done, it is also going to use PyTAS to verify that operation wise also it is working properly, right? Once it gets all clear from here, then it is going to trigger the pipeline for the production network, and it's going to do the same thing, use Ansible, NSO and PyTAS to validate, deploy and verify, right? Once everything is done, that at this point of time, what we have, the latest state of the network or the expected state of the network is all present inside my version control system. So at any point of time now, imagine there is a new engineer who wants to do some changes, he can download the latest code from here, from the version control system, and start working on it, right? So that's how it works in a closed loop manner, right from the point where the changes are done until the point it is tested and deployed. All of this is taken care in a very structured way, in a very systematic method, without any errors, without any human errors, right? So hope you guys liked it. Like I said, this is literally not my GitHub. This is present here for everyone to use. Thanks to the creator for building this amazing. You also have a lot of other demos as well. I just did the first one, but you can also check out some very cool other demos on the VPN and PyTAS and all of that, right? The only requirement is that you gotta go and reserve a sandbox here, and then just go about following this particular GitHub repo. I'm going to, obviously I'll post this link for you guys to check it out and kind of test your skills or get a more deeper understanding of NetDevOps. All right, thanks for watching, guys, and have a good day.